Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another Minnesota Hockey Player Development webinar. My name is Jake Amars. I'm the chairman of the Hockey Director Committee for Minnesota Hockey, and we're excited tonight to have Heather Mannix, USA Hockey ADM Regional Manager for Female Hockey. Heather just started her job at USA Hockey and comes with a really great background and unique background into research and studying of players and teams and athletes and organizational structures. And this in particular presentation, I think, is going to be really interesting, and she'll go further into it. But we're going to talk about psychology and allowing that to guide your program. But along with that, what is fun? And every study on youth sport shows that kids play sports to have fun. And her research went into what is fun. So before we get into that, for those who don't know what the Hockey Director Committee is, every one of your districts has a hockey director, and you should in your youth association. And our role is to assist you in implementing the American Development Model and the Minnesota Hockey Development Model, along with proper development paths and tools for you to utilize as a coach and hockey leader in your association. If you have questions during this presentation, please send a private chat to me. You can do that via the chat function on Zoom, and I'll facilitate that during and after the presentation from Heather. So Heather, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we're excited for your presentation and all the great research you've done. You and I have talked a lot about the work you've been doing, and I think it's a great tool and resource and information for our coaches in Minnesota to have and take advantage of.
Yeah, hopefully you guys get something out of it.
So, all right, thanks, Heather. Again, if you have questions, just send a chat to me.
Yep, and Jacob, feel free to interrupt me at any point if there's a pertinent question that that should be asked kind of in the middle of everything. So feel free to interrupt. All right, so just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I did my master's at the George Washington University, and my thesis research was in sport and exercise psychology. And so really sort of trying to understand the motivation behind sport and exercise participation. My thesis chair, so when I graduated, Amanda Visick, she actually is the principal investigator on the study. And so she had an NIH-funded grant. It was like a 3-year study that looked into what makes playing sports fun for kids, what gets in the way of fun, and then trying to figure out how we can create a tool that actually measures how much fun kids are having. And so I worked on that study with her for a couple of years, and then we went around to all sorts of different coaching clinics, academic conferences, and then worked with all sorts of local, regional, national, international associations. And so right now we're actually working with the Swedish Ice Hockey Federation to take this research, and they're actually implementing it and integrating it into their coaching education program. So, Swedish Ice Hockey is on board, USA Ice Hockey is on board, so hopefully you guys can get something good out of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about what fun actually is. And so one of the ways that I actually got my foot in the door with USA Hockey was when I moved back to Michigan. I just really wanted to get back into the game. I wanted to start coaching. I wanted to start playing. I missed it so much. I had been out of it for about 10 years. And so when I went to my first, my level 1 clinic, I was sitting there and I just saw the word fun just littered all over the PowerPoints, all over the, pamphlets, and, everything that we gave, or they gave to us. There was fun was just being emphasized as so important. And I walked away thinking, like, this is awesome. USA Hockey's actually understands the importance of making this experience fun for kids. But I also walked away thinking that if I hadn't spent the last, 5-ish years studying what makes playing sports fun for kids, I would have been left to sort of rely on my own experiences. And for some of us, that's completely fine. For other of us, for other people, their experiences may not be what kids consider fun nowadays. And so if we're relying on our own experiences, we're kind of leaving ourselves up for error in that sense. And so that's why it was super important for Amanda to do this study that, basically operationally defined what makes playing sports fun from the voices of the kids. So what do we actually know about fun? Well, we know that it's the number one reason why kids play sports across the board. Doesn't matter the sport. This has been researched and has been documented for decades that fun and enjoyment are the number one reasons why kids play sports. And consequently, when it's not fun anymore, that's the number one reason why they cite that they drop out of sports. So that's one of the reasons why the NIH thought that this was a really important study to conduct, because sport is actually one of the best ways to keep kids physically active from a public health standpoint as well. But what is fun, right? It's this sort of like elusive, emotive feeling, right? But there's nothing that's out there that is actually concretely defined what fun actually is. So we know when we're having it. We definitely know when we're not having it. But again, how do we take that experience that we feel and actually understand how do we, what is the road, what is the pathway, what is the foundation, how do we build this experience for kids? And so I know I can't see most of your guys' faces, but when I usually stand in front of a group of coaches, whenever I start using the F word in front of them, the fun word, they're much less affected by the actual F word. But when I start talking about fun, you get some winces, some eye rolls, right? Because when we think about fun, think about like a word association. You say the word fun or fun practice, this is what we think of, right? We're going to get this kid out there, or these ones, or this kid here. And how is this actually going to, make my players better? If I was just let them just go out there and just have fun, this is what's going to happen. This isn't going to help me win games. This isn't going to help me make them better athletes. We can't just let them just go out there and have fun. But if you think about it, if a coach or a player, a parent or a player asks, are you just going to have a fun practice today? This is what comes to mind, right? We don't think about fun as athlete development. And so one of the reasons why we have these sort of misconceptions is that we think of fun as synonymous with goofing off, that it detracts from athlete development, or that it's mutually exclusive from athlete development, right? I grew up playing AAA hockey, and I was told so many times that if you want to have fun, go play house, right? Go play rec. AAA isn't, you're here, this is serious. This isn't fun. This isn't supposed to be fun. So we have this sort of common misconceptions, these myths that we separate fun and athlete development, or fun and elite performance. And so the USOC actually did a pretty good study where they actually asked, go here, that's distracting. They asked Olympic athletes from two different quadrenniums. So from the 1980 games to the 2000, and then did another study that was 2000 to 2012 athletes. And they asked them a couple of questions, two of them being, what motivated you to start playing your sport? And fun is up there at the top. And then they asked, what motivated you to actually seek the highest level of performance in your sport? And again, fun was up towards the top. This was obviously before fun was operationally defined. And so when you look at what the answers were that were higher than fun, they actually are components of fun from the kid's definition, at least. So how exactly do you go about defining this emotive experience, right? How do you get this concrete definition from it? And so youth sports very unique in the sense that we as adults are responsible for creating this environment that the kids are then supposed to play within. But that often gets lost. Their voice often gets lost because we're the ones that are responsible for actually constructing this environment. And with the professionalization of youth sports, this is happening more and more often. And so one of the things that sort of get lost in the mix of this is just asking the kids what they want. And so that's one of the things that Amanda, the way she structured the study, this is what the purpose of it was. And so a lot of times with research, it doesn't get disseminated into the community very well because it's done at a very high level, or it's a very top-down approach, right? So you have these established theories and you have questions about a certain environment. And you take these questions, you test them out in the environment, and you see if they line up with the theory. But since there wasn't anything that operationally defined what made playing sports fun, we were in like a unique situation where Amanda took this methodology called concept mapping. That's a community-based research approach. So kind of embedded ourselves into the community. And then we asked players, parents, and coaches. So the stakeholders that are actually participating in the sport at that moment. And so by doing that, you take this data that a lot of times with research, it's, you do the study, you type up a journal article, it gets published, and it sits up on a desk somewhere and collects dust. And it rarely ever gets sent back into the community. But because this is a community-based approach and a ground level research approach, keeping the data in the voice of the child and in the voice of the stakeholders was insanely important. So that's what we did here. So there's a 3-step approach, and with the methodology, what I'm going to do is just take this, with the actual research, I'm going to take kind of a 3,000 level or 3,000 foot level approach of looking at this. If you want to have a little bit more detail, I highly suggest that you go onto the American Development Model USA Hockey page, Facebook page. They have all of these archived, and Amanda actually went into pretty good depth on the study and how to implement it as well. So if you want more of this, definitely look at the Facebook page there. So the first step in this methodology is called brainstorming. And so it is what it says. We basically went into the community, and with the kids, it was actually like a piece of paper on a clipboard, and there's some instructions at the top. And then this sentence was right at the top of the page. One thing that makes playing sports fun for players is, and then we told them to list everything that they could think of, right? And this was in a soccer community, but to make sure that it wasn't soccer specific, what we did was we said, how many of you actually play more than one team sport? Over 75% of the kids played more than one team sports. We said, awesome. So don't think about just when you're playing soccer. Think about when you're playing hockey, when you're playing football, when you're playing lacrosse, right? All of the things that make playing sports fun, list them, everything. And so we had hundreds of participants. And so we obviously got thousands of statements, and a lot of them were overlap or the same. There's a lot of redundancy. But so when we took all of those statements and we synthesized them down, what we found was that they actually identified 81 specific actions and behaviors that define what makes playing sports fun for them. And so if you look at this, we have that sort of misconception that fun is just goofing off. It detracts from athlete development. But if you see some of the things that they identified here, we have working hard, trying hard, making a good play by scoring, learning a skill or using a skill that you learned in practice in a game, learning and improving, right? So all of these things. So fun is just, it's not this simple, it's goofing off. If you get done with that's another one that was always said, like, if you guys try hard during all of your drills, like we'll line up, we'll play shinny in the middle of the ice and we'll scrimmage at the end of the practice for fun, right? But scrimmaging during practices, that's fun. So what you'll know is, or what you'll start to see, hopefully, is starting to see the connection between development, learning, and improving, and how that is a huge component of fun. They're very tightly married. They're not separate entities. So you don't have to, memorize this. You'll see this again in a couple of slides. And Amanda actually tweeted out this slide that you'll see in a couple of slides. And if you aren't on Twitter, send Jacob a message and I can get that information to you. So the second step, so after they brainstormed all of those ideas, we said, we went back into the community. We said, you guys did such an awesome job defining all of these things that go into this fun experience. And so we gave them then a stack of note cards. They were laminated, and each note card had one of the determinants. So a stack of 81 note cards. And we said, okay, you told us that all of these things make up fun in sports. Now we need you to help us understand, how do they all interact with each other? How are they connected to one another? So we need you to take these cards and we need you to pile sort them in whatever way makes sense to you. And so as they did this, we would walk around with little Post-it notes and we would ask them, like, okay, these cards in this pile, like, what would you call this pile? You had a question, Jacob?
Well, we did have a question come through, and I thought that it was relevant to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Is or was there a difference in the answers to what makes sports fun between male and female athletes?
It's a great question. And it's almost like you set me up. No, we'll get to that in just a few slides for sure.
Awesome.
But so we started pile sorting these, and we went around, we asked, what would you name this pile? Again, just to keep it in the kid's voice. And then lastly, we said, okay, there's 81 things. They can't all be the most fun to sport, right? So how important are each one of these things relative to all of the other ones? So that they go from a 1 to 5, not as important, to extremely important. And so this is how the kids ended up defining what fun was. Okay, so we had these 81 determinants. They categorized them into 11 factors, 11 fun factors, so 11 categories. And so to kind of hit on that question, what we did was we kind of like threw the blanket of fun on the experience. So we wanted to capture everything that could be fun for kids. And that's why we asked how important are each one of these things. And so when we looked for participants, we wanted to make sure that we had equal representation of girls and boys, kids that played rec, kids that played travel, and then younger kids, which was U9 to U13, and older kids, which was U14 to U19. And so by doing that, we could then take all of these 81 things and look at how important each one of these things are, and are there differences? Where are the differences? Are there similarities? Where are the similarities? And so we'll get to that in just a second, but it's a great question. And so this is what Amanda tweeted out a couple of days ago. And so it's on Twitter, but again, if you're not on Twitter, let us know and we'll get this information too if you want it. So the way that you read this is the fun factor, trying hard, is the most important, followed by positive team dynamics and positive coaching, learning and improving, games, practices, team friendship, mental bonuses, game time support, team rituals, and swag. So if you see, fun is complex, but doesn't have to be complicated. If you look at a lot of these determinants, a lot of them are common sense. But again, without this common knowledge and an operational definition of it, we can't look at, differences between different groups. We can't look at, we can't look at a lot of things. So this is the foundation. This is the blueprint, okay, of fun. And so the way you also read this is that, so say here in positive team dynamics, playing well together as a team is up at the top. Warming up and stretching as a team is down at the bottom. Playing well together as a team is the most important within this factor. Warming up is less important. Warming up as a team and stretching as a team is less important within this factor. And so we also have a list that ranks all 1 through 81, irrespective of their actual factors. And so what's cool for coaches is that, you can start to see the link between fun and development. Again, kids are saying that trying hard is the most important thing to fun. Trying your best, working hard, competing, right? Learning from mistakes, learning new skills, being challenged to improve and get better at your sport. But then there's this big one here of positive coaching. So kids actually defined what a positive coach looks like to them. So this here is the definition of positive coaching within the umbrella of fun. And so kids are looking for a coach that treats them with respect and knows a lot about the sport, that allows mistakes while staying positive, doesn't berate them in front of their teammates, right? So this is just that sort of a zoomed in version. And again, this is kind of that 3,000 foot level of view of the research, but I wanted to give you at least the foundation of it, because then I can start to talk to you a little bit about the application and what it actually looks like and how you can start to implement it and make sure you're implementing it in your practices. And so to get to the question, what we found was when we compared girls versus boys, when we compared rec kids versus travel kids, and we compared younger kids to older kids, we found that there is this like tiering level of importance. And this was consistent across all subgroups. And we get a lot of pushback on this. And one of the reasons why is because we inherently think that boys and girls, because they're boys and girls, they are different. They have to be different, right? But what they're telling us is that they're looking for the same things. These things are the most important to them in terms of creating the most fun experience. A lot of questions I get about is younger kids and older kids, that people will say, what's fun for an 8-year-old isn't fun for an 18-year-old. I don't think that's necessarily true, but what I will say is that, because I don't know if you've ever seen an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old, not we, but when I still play, and if we play sharks and minnows, like, that's still fun, right? But what fun looks like to an 8-year-old may look different to an 18-year-old. But what you need to understand is that the underlying principles, we want an environment that allows them to try hard, that allows them to work hard, that allows them to compete. What does competing to an 8-year-old in sharks and minnows looks different than competing to an 18-year-old that's doing, a breakout drill or a small area game or something. That compete level, or that compete may look different, and that's okay, but we still need that competition. They're still saying that competition is what makes sports fun for them. So what we found is that kids are young athletes, they're way more similar than they are different when it comes to their fun priorities. And I'll show you what we call ladder graphs later. And that's a way to compare the groups. And I didn't include the kids, but I can explain to you what we found with them in there. Interestingly enough, though, is that we found that coaches were not necessarily on the same page in terms of what their kids were actually saying is fun, and then what they thought was fun for their kids. And so what we did, so here's that ladder graph. And so basically what this is it allows, it's a quick and easy way to kind of compare two groups together. Okay, so we have parents and players, they're being compared here, and then players and coaches. So these are two different ladder graphs. We just kind of smushed them together to make it a little bit easier. And so the way you read this is that the more horizontal the rungs are in the ladder, the more similar their rating values were. And so we'll bring you down to this little number down here. So this is a correlation coefficient, and really easily explained, this number goes from -1 to +1. All right, on a spectrum. So if this number was -1, what it would mean is that if parents rated positive coaching as the most important, kids rated it as the least important, and vice versa. If this number is a +1, that means when parents rated positive coaching as most important, kids rated as most important. They're exactly identical. Okay, so 0.93 is actually pretty good. Their parents and players are actually pretty well aligned in terms of what parents think is fun, and then what the kids are actually saying is fun for them. When we did the comparison with girls and boys, rec and travel, younger kids and older kids, we found the numbers here. This correlation coefficient was 0.95 to 0.97, which statistically means that they were almost exactly the same. So when we look over here and we looked at players and coaches, this was the lowest number that we had seen. And so we wanted to kind of take a zoomed in approach and look at what was actually happening here. And so what we found, we separated younger players, which is U9 to U13, and coaches of younger players. And then older players, which is U14 to U19, and coaches of older players. And so if you see here, this number is 0.90, which again, it's pretty high. That means that they're pretty well aligned with one another. You have some little differences here, but nothing drastic. But then we go over here and we see this 0.71, which is by far the lowest correlation coefficient that we found. So what that means is that there's just this big disconnect between what the kids are saying is fun and what the coaches think is actually fun for the kids. And so when we asked this question to the coaches and the parents, just to make sure that I'm clear, or that you're clear, we didn't ask, what do you think is fun? We asked, what do you think is fun for the players? Okay, so that's what we're comparing here. So it's what the players are saying, and then what the coaches are saying, what they think is fun for the players. And so if you notice here, this big one, this is one of the biggest differences that we saw, was trying hard. So older kids are still saying that trying hard is the most important to fun. And coaches are saying, there's no way that my kids are saying that trying hard is fun, right? I can't get them to try hard if my life depended on it. I'm yelling at them, I'm screaming at them, I'm chasing them down the ice, banging my stick, and I can't get them to give me any effort. And so one of the things that we'll go into a little bit here is how do we draw that effort out of them? What can we do as coaches to get them to give us the effort rather than us forcing them to give us effort? But before we get there, one thing I want to highlight is, so again, this is U9 to U13. This is U14 to U19. Right here in that 13, 14 age group is where you start to see a drop off in organized sport. That's one of the largest. I think it's like 70% of kids will stop playing organized sport by the age of 13. And one of the reasons why they cite as the most important, or the number one reason that they cite why they drop out is that it's not fun anymore. And so as coaches, it's very, very important for us to understand what the kids are saying, how they're defining fun, so that we can be on the same page as them. We can meet them where they are, and understanding how we create these environments that are actually fun for them is going to help keep these kids in the game longer, which is what we all want. So getting back to trying hard, I have a couple of examples here, and I like to preface this always with, this isn't one club that does this. I've been doing this for not that long, but I can tell you that I've traveled. I've done a lot of traveling since I started working with USA Hockey, and I can tell you that in almost every program that we go to, we see these kind of drills. And so this is something that what we're trying to do here is we're looking at, I want you to keep an eye on the level of effort that the kids are showing. And then these down here are the determinants that are found within trying hard and learning and improving. And so as coaches, what can we do to set up the environment to get these kids to try hard? Okay, so this is one example. We've all done this drill. I've coached this drill. I've done this drill as a player. You guys will recognize it. So I want you to watch the effort that these drills are putting in. And then what are the skills that the coach is actually trying to implement here, to work on? Stops and starts, transitions, tight turns. There is, 10 different variations of this drill, and they did probably 5 of them during this practice. But if you notice, the level of effort there is just not great. One of the things to ask yourself, are they being challenged at all? No, not really. Do they have to make any decisions? No. Are they going through the motions? Yeah. And so if you see kids giving effort in these types of environments or these types of drills, it's typically coming from this external source of motivation, right? To try hard. It's they don't want to get yelled at, they don't want to get screamed at, they don't want to get chased by the coach while they're banging their stick on the ice. That's why you're trying hard. You're not trying hard because you're competing in this drill. Okay. And so Amanda and I did this presentation. This is where we kind of put these slides together over in Sweden back in January. And we kind of made these up while we were over there. And one of the things we did was we just looked how many of these determinants are actually being fostered in this drill. We decided, well, they're moving, they're exercising, being active, they're arguably getting and staying in shape. But I mean, is the level of effort actually high enough to tax them cardiovascularly? It's arguable. But they're not really learning, they're not given the opportunity to learn from mistakes. They're not really being challenged to improve, right? They're not competing. So the level of the amount of fun determinants that are actually being fostered in a drill like this is kind of low. Meanwhile, you compare it to something like this. So example of a simple chaos drill, right? It's much more game-like. They have to keep their head up. They have to be able to be aware of their surroundings, or else they're going to run into somebody. It's more game-like because there's an offense and somebody trying to get the puck. So you have to use deception, evasion, guard the puck, protect the puck, but you're also doing those stops and starts. You're also doing those transitions. You're also doing those tight turns. All of the skills that coaches are trying to work on in the flow drills of stops and starts on the dots can be done in something like this. And if you listened, you hear the girls screaming, you hear them, laughing. Like, this is much more fun. So when you look at what fun determinants are actually being fostered in a drill like this or a game like this, we highlighted them we bolded them. And the ones that are in blue, we decided they're not actually doing these things. They're not making a good play. They're not they're not playing well during a game, but the skills that they're learning in this type of environment are so much more transferable to the actual game-like environment. Again, because you have to keep your head up. You have to learn how to handle the puck, protect the puck, and be aware of your surroundings, find open ice. And so, are they learning from mistakes? Absolutely. You lose the puck, the other person gets it, you got to get it back. Does that happen in a game? Yeah, absolutely. So that's one example of just kind of comparing two different types of drills. I have two more examples here, and then I'm almost done with my slides. And so if we have any questions or want to have a discussion after that, we can do that. The other one is whenever we go to a program, doesn't matter if we're meeting with an 8U team or an 18U team, we ask them, what is it that you're trying to work on? What is something that your team is struggling with? How can we help you, in this practice? And no matter what, it's always breakouts. Our kids can't break out if their life depended on it, right? They can't catch a pass. They can't get out of the zone with any kind of possession. But oftentimes we see this. Again, watch the effort. Is it game-like? Do they have to make any decisions? Is there any conflict? The only time that there's conflict is right at the end. It's by accident, and that's why your team can't break out, right? Because they're not. So if you're trying to work on your breakout with 5-on-0 breakouts, you're not setting these kids up for a skill that's transferable to the game. Because at what point at any time during a game do we have the luxury of actually going back and leisurely picking up the puck behind the net, casually passing it to the winger who can nicely pass it to the center who's cutting perfectly, in the zone, right? With no pressure. So if we're practicing our breakouts in this way, we're not doing anything to foster these fun determinants. Again, they're exercising, they're moving, right? But they're not thinking, they're not being challenged cognitively or physically, arguably. And it's not game-like. So these skills, even if it's just you're trying to get them to learn the flow of it, these skills aren't going to transfer into the game if it's not game-like in practice, if they're not being challenged, if they're not having to make decisions and quick decisions in practice. And then lastly, compare that last one to this one. And so my first week on the job, I was able to spend close to a week with a couple of Finnish program managers from FIHA. And it was an awesome experience. I learned so much from them. Just the way that they look at ice utilization, the way that they approach drills. So if you can see on this one here, this is a half ice drill, but it's not half ice, halfway. It is, we're cutting it hot dog. It's right up and down the middle of the ice. And so it's just thinking about different ways of utilizing the ice, which is really awesome. So you're still getting the length, they're still having to skate the full length of the ice, but you crunch that width up a little bit, and it forces them to make a little bit tighter decisions, quicker decisions, and there's a little bit more conflict. And so again, this is an offense, and so an offense drill, but also a defensive breakout. Okay, so just a quick, because it kind of goes quick here. This is a 2-on-1. As soon as they cross the red line, you got two back checkers that come in, and it becomes a 2-on-3. All right. And so you'll see that the forwards actually make a mistake. They lose the puck. And instead of just dumping the puck to the defense, because that's not the point of the drill, you'll see Sammy gives the puck back to the forwards, because the point of this drill is that we want to create a defensive zone turnover that leads into a breakout. Okay. So again, watch the effort, watch the intensity. Score. Bad pass. Gives it back to the forwards. Defense create a turnover. They break out. Go 2-on-1 the next. It's down the other way. You have 2 back checkers coming in. So again, this is more game-like. They have to make decisions. They're being cognitively challenged, and they have to. It is something that you will absolutely encounter in the game. And so the skills that you're working on here are going to be much more transferable into the game, just because you're put under the same type of game-like pressure within practice, where you can fail, where we want you to fail. And so we look at what fun determinants were actually being fostered here. And again, way more, right? Are they learning from mistakes? Yes. Are they being challenged to improve, to get better? Absolutely. Are they competing? Are they playing hard? Yes. All of those things. So as coaches, we just have to think about how are we structuring our drills and our games to help pull these behaviors out, because the kids want to give us this effort. It's just that flow drills and standing in corners and lines, that's not fun, right? And so if you're forcing us to stand in a line and then we have to go and stop on this dot, go to that dot, stop on that dot, I'm not going to give you a ton of effort, unless it's because I don't want to get yelled at. It's not coming from that internal source of motivation. And so this I pulled from, I think I just got a couple more slides here. This I pulled from another one of our webinars with John Hines, who's the coach of Nashville Predators, but also did a lot of coaching within the NTDP program. And he beautifully stated this. We didn't tee it up or anything. It came organically, and I had to pull these quotes from him. And so he basically was talking about what are the difference between practices for maintenance and practices for development. Being within the NTDP program, he had a lot of experience with practices for development. And now that he's at the pro level, he has to have that, he has to kind of accept practices for maintenance as a part of the game now. And so so this is actually a quote that he said there. He said, let me pull this up here. He said, so practices for maintenance, those are your 5-on-0s drills. Those are your flow drills. Those are the drills that basically get the blood flowing. The players are able to feel the puck, and they're not too hard, but they do nothing for the player's development. But at the pro level, they have 82 game season. They travel. They have players that have played for years and years. They need those practices for maintenance to be able to give them energy to play in the next game. What happens often, and arguably too often, is that we see NHL teams doing these flow drills and doing these 5-on-0 breakouts, and we think that we should do them because NHL is doing them. But we have to, as coaches, recognize the difference between practices for maintenance and practices for development. So if he's saying, as somebody with a background that he has in development, and then also the experience that he has at the pro level, that yeah, practices for maintenance have a role when you are playing an 82 game season and you need to just get the blood flowing and give guys energy to play in their next game when they've had a 3 or 4 game back-to-back schedule. So they're not doing anything for the player's development. And so that's what we have to recognize as coaches. When compared to practices for development, so when he talked about practices for development, he said you're putting a heavy emphasis on the pace in which you practice. You're putting them into situations where they have to think the game. There's multiple pucks in certain drills. They're game-like situations. Those are areas when you're practicing with your players, they're improving. Okay, you're constantly having to engage them mentally, put them into situations that they have to think, and then they have to compete. And you're putting them in game-like situations. That's practice for development. And so what I did here is that I just highlighted a couple of the words. He hasn't had any experience or any knowledge that, to my knowledge at least, of the fun maps and that research. He's purely talking about development here. And by doing that, he's talking about improving. He's talking about competing. He's talking about development. He's talking about putting them in game-like situations. Those are all things that the kids have defined as what makes playing sports fun. Kids want to develop. Developing is fun. And so when he talks about what development is, he's actually using fun determinants to describe what development actually is. So I thought that was pretty cool that he did that. And the last slide here, this is our 5 elements of practice from USA Hockey and the ADM. And so arguably, these 4 elements here are all aspects of fun, right? But what we want you to do as coaches, we want you to critically look at your practice design and your games and drills that you're running. We want to see how many of these are you checking off. Are they getting a lot of puck touches? Are they constantly making decisions? Does it look like the game? Are they under the same kind of pressure? And I mean, you don't always have to be under game-like pressure. You can lighten things up. You can manipulate the space to help with skill development. But does it look something like the game? And then are there different levels of challenges to meet kids where they are? And that's one of the things with the age-appropriate training, and especially with teams that have such a wide variety of skill level, having those station-based drills or station-based practices where you can actually just make little tweaks to each one of those stations that can meet the level of challenge of where the skill level is with each player. And the last thing I want to touch on is kind of back to that, this one here. So one thing that we talk about a lot is, small area games and station-based drills and all of that. One of the things that we want to get away from, though, is not doing small area games just for the sake of doing small area games. So a lot of times we'll see, you line up your players on the blue line and we're going to play 3-on-3 cross ice because USA Hockey says that we should do small area games. But it's actually understanding what is the purpose of that game. What are the skills that you're trying to help improve with your players? And how is this game highlighting that? How is this game challenging that skill set? And so again, when you go back to this clip here, if you're working on breakouts, it's as simple as don't pass the puck back to the defenseman. If you're working on your defense creating a turnover in their defensive zone and then being able to break out, don't give the puck back to them if the forwards lose it. Give it back to the forwards and make the defense make that turnover, if that's the purpose of the drill. That's just one example, but we want to just try to think about it as coaches a little bit more critically of, we're not doing small area games just to do small area games. Like, they're going to help and they're going to be more fun for the kids just because they're games and they're competing, but there's a different level that you can reach with these games. And it's all about how you look at it as a coach and what is your purpose? What are you trying to get out of this drill? I think that's all that I have. Yeah, so that's Amanda. If you have any questions about the study, you can email me, you can email her. We're both on Twitter. But I highly suggest if you want a little bit more of an in-depth look at the research study, definitely check out that webinar that she did with the ADM. So hopefully that was helpful.
Well, Heather, thank you. And if anybody has questions, please send them via the chat to me. And Heather, we did have a couple come through that I think are just awesome questions and things that we can all relate to. One of them is that, this coach considers themselves a positive coach. And I think you would consider yourself a positive coach. I consider myself a positive coach. But how do you balance reward and discipline, especially when kids start getting to that silly area? So how do you still hold kids accountable for their actions with keeping what you're doing fun?
It's a great question. I think that if you can, it's about setting intentions and setting the tone of the practice. And so one of the things that who was it that was just on? It was one of the last webinars, but they were talking about identity, right? I think I can't remember. They're talking about identity though. And when you emphasize the importance, so when you come to practice, you're there to learn, you're there to improve, and you're there to have fun, right? You're going to learn, you're going to have fun if everybody has this identity of the team of what is important, right? So you create this team identity that you're here to learn, you're here to improve for your teammates, and then making sure that you're structuring your games and your drills so that they're actually engaged. And so a lot of times in that silly stage, that typically starts to happen when they're standing in lines for too long, right? And so making sure that you're structuring those games so that there's a quick turnover, or you have multiple games going on at once. The more time that they have to stand around, typically the more silly they get, and the less engaged that they become. So it's just constantly just trying to figure out, how do we get everybody as active as possible and as engaged as possible, and the least amount of standing around in lines.
What are some things that coaches can do on ice and off ice to improve that fun factor? Because I think we focus a lot of our energy on what goes on the ice, but we forget that off the ice, team building, and getting to know your teammates, and staying in the hotels, and doing the pasta dinners, and all of that plays a role in the experience these players have. So what are some ways that coaches can, what are some things that our coaches on the call right now can take back and implement right away on ice and off ice?
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me go back to, because I did the 3,000 level or 3,000 foot approach, we didn't get into the different fundamentals. So we have here our context specific factors are sort of the on the ice, right? And parents often think that, as coaches, your job starts when you step on the ice and it stops when you step off the ice, right? It starts when you step on the bench and it stops when you step off the bench, right? Right. But no, we know as coaches that there are all of these different things. All of these things impact their experience. And so we have the context within the middle of the map. We have the internal sources of fun here, which are the learning and improving, trying hard, and mental bonuses. We have the external sources of fun here, which are positive coaching, game time support, and swag. But then we have the social sources of fun here. And so if you're thinking about how do I build these positive team dynamics, how do I build these team friendships, how do I, facilitate the social part of fun, this is where you find it. So positive team dynamics, team friendships, and team rituals is where you look at. And one of the things that I like to point out with these is that if you look at the positive team dynamics, the determinants that fall underneath this factor. So it's playing well together as a team, supporting my teammates, showing good sportsmanship, supporting or being supported by my teammates. All of these things typically happen within the context of the sport. But if you look at team friendships, getting along with your teammates, being around your friend, having a group of friends outside of school, hanging out with teammates outside of practices and games. So these are the social sources of fun or components of fun that are off the ice, right? And so, and then team rituals are kind of like a mix of the two. But one of the things I like to tell coaches is that I always ask the question is, like, how many of you have ever been in a toxic locker room? And usually most people raise their hand. I've been in a toxic locker room and it was awful. And I always ask, how many people are actually friends with those kids or those people now, or were they off the ice? Not many raise their hand. The couple that always raise their hand, I'm like, you were the toxic one. But so what I usually tell coaches is that if you can focus on creating these positive team dynamics within the context of the sport, you're likely to have these team friendships develop outside of the sport, and they're going to be stronger. If you have positive team dynamics on the ice, you're going to have stronger team friendships off the ice, which typically lead back to more positive team dynamics on the ice or within the locker room or whatever. And then you get this positive feedback loop of social support. So I would suggest, a lot of the things with the ADM and creating those small area games and those station-based drills allows these things to happen within the team environment on the ice. And then just making sure that you're aware of these and, you know, have those pizza parties and those, you know, when you're at hotels and things like that. Absolutely. That's all going to just that positive feedback loop of social sources of fun.
You've played on a lot of teams and coached and you're doing great work with USA Hockey. Did any of the research results surprise you?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there was a lot of surprise at first, and then after it sank in, it made more sense. So we didn't think that they were going to be as similar as they actually were in terms of how they rated the level of importance. And so, you know, but then like when you take a step back and you look at it, you know, I would rate these as my top 4 for sure, 100%. I know, Jacob, you said that swag would be number 1 on your list, but most people, what I usually, because there's always one guy that will argue that staying in hotels is the most important thing for his kid to have fun. And I said, you know, I actually had a coach that just battled me on this, and it was like, okay, so like if you said like we can't stay in hotels this year, like we're not going, it's just not happening. You're still going to play hockey, you still get to hang out with your friends, you know, like taking that one thing away when you compare it to everything else that goes into the experience, is that the deal breaker? If it is, then he's probably not having a very fun experience playing hockey anyways. So these things down here, even though they're lower on the level of importance, it's just because when compared to everything else, they're not as important. So yeah, so I think that there was a lot of shock at first, but then when you sit back and you think about it, you're like, no, that makes sense. So
Absolutely. And like, what are some tools and tips? I know we have some local hockey directors on our call that oversee their youth associations, player development committees. What are some tools and methods that they can bring back to their youth association to educate and ensure that their coaches are coaching in a fun way and providing that great experience for the players?
yeah. Well, I think that if you can give them access to, I mean, well, if they have Facebook, I would highly recommend them watching the webinar with Amanda. She's a mental performance certified mental performance consultant as well. So she's an actual sports psychologist. So she goes a lot deeper into like the actual sports psychology side of things. So that's a very good tool. You know, this is now accessible to everybody. Hopefully here in the future, we'll actually have a tool that will be valid and reliable that you can actually start to, it's a little ways out, but where you can actually start to measure how much fun kids are having. And that can then be a resource to see, you know, coaches are doing like this really, really well, but these areas they're struggling on. And then you can start to look at like where you need to allocate resources. But I think the USA Hockey's ADM is doing a good job, especially with the 5 elements of practice, getting that information to them as well. It talks about fun. It talks about some of the pretty important aspects of fun in terms of those elements. And then, you know, just you guys have to become fun ambassadors. You know, this is not easy to change the way that people think. It's not going to happen overnight, but you know, showing them something like this may be a little bit overwhelming, but at least you have an operational definition of what makes playing sports fun. And then just tell them that you don't have to try to do, I mean, again, a lot of these are common sense that you should be doing anyways. But, you know, like if you were to focus on just these 3 things, it doesn't matter who you are coaching, whether you're coaching girls, boys, rec, travel, younger kids, older kids. If you're trying to foster and facilitate the determinants within these 3 factors, you're going to improve their experience.
For sure. we had a question come through on the chat. What sort of feedback did you get when you made this presentation in Sweden, and did you get ideas from their program?
It's a great question. Yeah, so they were on board with it almost immediately. But the way that their coaching education, they're kind of revamping it, and they're very knowledgeable on the sports psychology side of things. And so they have used self-determination theory as like an underpinning of their entire coaching education. And so basically the gist of self-determination theory is that every person has these three basic psychological needs of the need for autonomy, so having some sort of choice over your actions, to have competence, and so a level and a sense of mastery, and then relatedness, so you have that social connectedness either with people or with the experience or with the context. And what I've noticed is that so we've taken this study, this data here, and it's been translated into Swedish, back translated into English to make sure nothing was lost in translation. And then they now have a Swedish Fun Maps version. And when we did focus groups with all sorts of kids from 9 to 19, there about 75 kids, which is a pretty large sample size for focus groups. And one of the things that we noticed is that these kids have the ability to articulate how things make them feel. They talk about how this sense of being able to play creatively. They think that it may be more so a determinant that should be in games, not practices, because their practices, they're allowed to and actually encouraged to be creative. Coaches, the way that their system is structured allows for these kids to have time to work on their own skills on their own. Finland does the same thing. So they actually get, 15 to 20 minutes on the ice where they get to choose what the skills they want to get better at. And then you can either create your own drills, you can ask a coach to help you out, or you can get with another player and you can work on, the same skills that you're trying to both master. So they have much more autonomy in their players. Like their players have much more autonomy over their own development. Whereas here, I think we're more over-structured. Kids are always told, go here, do this. When you get to the hash marks, you stand there and you wait for the D to come around the net, and then you get the puck and then you pass it to the center. And so you take away this level of the decision making, basically. And so that's something that, I think I got sidetracked there, but that's
it's like you said too earlier in your presentation, fun can look chaotic. And
learning is chaotic. Like,
it may not look pretty and all of that, but it's working and it's game-like situations.
Yeah. And it's a really good point that you brought up, because that's absolutely something that you can take back to your parents, to say that learning is messy. Learning is not. So the 5-on-0 breakout, that's for coaches and that's for parents, because that makes us feel good that they pick the puck up, they make a tape to tape pass, and everything looks really organized and pretty. So they must be learning something. But then when you go to a game, they can't break out because they've never been put in that situation. And so they have to be put in those messy, chaotic situations in practice. Otherwise, we're stealing that opportunity for them to learn.
100%. Well, that's all we have for questions. Heather, thank you so much for speaking with us and joining us for a Minnesota Hockey Player Development webinar. I think that this was fantastic and something that a lot of our coaches and association development leaders needed to hear. So if you have questions following this presentation, please feel free to reach out to myself or Heather or your district hockey director. To find information on your district hockey director, you can go to minnesotahockey.org, roll over about board of directors, the committees, and then select the hockey director committee. And As I said, each of your districts has a hockey director, and our role is to get this information to you and to assist your association in implementing the best player development strategies. This presentation has also been streamed live on YouTube, and you can make it the link, you can send it to all those in your association. Heather, thank you again for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Have a great rest of the night, everybody.